Well, we're getting up this morning to plenty of news to talk about. Gary Austin is with me here, the news anchor. And yesterday I had a chance to chat with candidate Rick Snyder, the GOP candidate for governor, the one tough nerd. And Gary, he was having his first town hall meeting last night in Chelsea from 6 till 7 at the train depot. And so he was, going around talking to different programs and that sort of thing, and reporters and all that. So he joined us on the air. And I asked him a series of questions, and I'm not sure how I felt about how the interview went. I mean, I've talked to him many times before, right here in the studio, in fact. He seemed to me to be a little bit close to the vest, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. You know, MPS, here's my analysis real quick, and I've known you for years. I know your style. You approached this interview like he was some sort of a politician, a politico, someone who's been in the trenches politically for a long time. He's not. And I think you were almost expecting, even anticipating, longer answers, more details, a lot more background. He was given none of that. It's like you were doing an on-the-street interview with some average guy. That's what it sounded like.
Yeah, but he's not an average guy. He wants to be governor of the state of Michigan.
I know, but his approach is different, though. He may want that job, but his way of going about it is not like your normal political candidate that we're used to day in and day out on this program. He's different.
Doesn't he sound a little bit kind of he has a matter-of-fact way of speaking about things. And doesn't he?
Yeah, he's not a politician. He said right from the get-go, I'm not a political guy. And boy, I tell you what, he sure does not sound like one. He sounds like an average guy. So if that's his objective, to not be political, to sound like your average Joe from Main Street, boy, he's achieved that.
Is this why he doesn't like to participate in debates? Because in debates, you just about have to answer the direct question with a direct answer, don't you?
Oh, yeah. And today, MPS debates, as you know, I mean, it's the fine art of sound bites. And all these political candidates, and we know, I mean, think of we don't have to name names. We know the long list. I mean, they work on that sort of thing. They perfect the sound bites. You get the perfect sound bite. That's the one that's going to end up on a newscast later in the day. That's the one that's going to be quoted in the newspaper later in the day and that sort of thing. But Rick Snyder, I don't think he cares about that. He's just an average guy.
Well, I began to wonder, at some stage if maybe I wasn't asking the right questions or posing them in the proper manner. And because he really was close to the vest, I thought. He really didn't want to wander at all, and there were questions that he just flat refused to answer.
Yeah. He wasn't afraid. Now, a lot of politicians would be afraid not to answer, afraid that maybe their opponent or maybe someone or maybe the interviewer would try to press them real hard on it, and it could have turned into an embarrassing sort of situation. But Snyder, he just doesn't care. He's going to be who he is, period.
Well, let's say, though, that, Gary, that I ran into you at, Copper for dinner, and you were standing there waiting for your drink to come. And I asked you a question. You said, well, I'm not really going to talk about that. I'm just going to talk about what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, which is going to be salmon. It wouldn't be normal conversation, would it?
Well, it wouldn't, but then again, I'm not running for anything. So he's got it's a fine balance. You know, he wants to be the average guy, and I think that's his objective. And you know what? I don't think Rick Snyder even has to try. I think that's just the way he is. And I think as this campaign develops, but you know, MPS, that style of his, sort of casual, as you call it, close to the vest, is really going to be put to the test when he has his first debate with Verge Bernero.
Well, here,
watch out.
Let me let you hear a little bit of this here, and we'll stop it along the way if we have to. Here's my interview yesterday with Rick Snyder.
Good morning, Michael Patrick. Great to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Do you plan to continue the one tough nerd moniker into the general election now? Will you bring that with you from the primary?
Sure. It worked very well in the primary, and we're going to continue largely the same campaign we've had the whole time. It worked well the first time, and we're going to keep going because it's the right thing to do.
Do you think that New York City should allow a mosque to be built 2 blocks from the Ground Zero area?
Well, again, those are federal issues. I'm sticking to Michigan issues, Michael Patrick, because that's the issue we need to focus on in our state. We've got an economy suffering. We've lost 1 million jobs.
Okay, let's hold it there for just a second, if we could, Gary.
Now, a lot of politicians, MPS, they would feel obligated to answer that question. But Rick Snyder, he's not cut from that cloth. He's a different guy.
But the question was asked. You just flat out don't want to answer it?
Well, I don't think it's so much that. I think he wanted to focus on, like he said, issues that are more pertinent to Michigan. Now, I think your question was certainly topical because the whole mosque business in New York is the nationwide buzz, and I think for a lot of listeners, and I think your question was posed right, they'd be curious to hear what Rick Snyder has to say about that, to kind of get his perspective on issues outside of the state. I know that's what you were targeting, but Snyder, he would have nothing to do with it, and he was not afraid to say so, and he was not afraid of even, I think MPS, even if you pressed him on it, he said, no, come on, Rick, come on, tell us, what do you really think about this mosque business? And I think he'd say, no,
Well,
MPS, I don't want to talk about that.
But two things. We have a huge concentration of people from the Middle East living here in Michigan, particularly in the Dearborn area and in other parts of Michigan as well. It's relevant to them, don't you think?
Yeah, I think if you maybe pursued that angle and specifically said that the way you just framed it right now,
Maybe he would have.
I think that may have prompted, maybe not, it may have prompted him to say something.
But isn't the answer to a question like that the way we learn about the person that we would elect or hire to be Michigan's governor? I mean, if you were in a job interview, you couldn't say, well, I'm not really going to talk about that, would you?
I think politically we're used to politicians answering questions that may be, even they may perceive a question a little off the beaten track, they'll answer it anyway. But Rick Snyder, like we've said, he's not your average politician. In fact, he's not a politician at all. And I think the fact that Snyder is doing that, he's making a point. I'm not your average guy. I'm not your average politician. I'm different. We need something different in Lansing, and I'm the different Lansing needs.
Well, if I said in a job interview to someone, what are your hobbies? And they said, well, I don't really want to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the job that I'm going to do for you. And I said, well, it seems here like you had a short time with your, let's see, from April 1998 to 1999, you were only there for 6 months. What happened there? And he said, well, I'm only going to talk about the future. There's no point in looking at the past, but we learn things from the past. Well, let's continue a little bit with the interview. This is Rick Snyder and myself yesterday. Well, let me ask you, at least, though, the president's approval rating this morning, 42%, very, very low for President Obama. Why do you think that the president's approval rating is so low, and what grade would you give him?
Well, I wouldn't give him a grade. Again, I'm focusing on the state. One of the challenges, though, that I will
I'm not going to give him a grade, he says
there,
there, Gary. You won't give the president of the United States a grade when the approval rating is at 42%. Why not?
I don't think, probably MPS, he didn't want to be pigeonholed into something that he may have to explain later. Okay, he gives President Obama a grade. Interviewers, I'm not saying this is the tact you would take. A lot of interviewers say, well, why do you give him a B? Or why do you give him a C? Or why do you give him an A? Or whatever. I mean, what's the reason for that? And then he's got to explain. And then he may say, well, I gave him this grade because, well, but then maybe you'd want to press him for even more detail. And it's clear he just didn't want to.
Well, wait a minute. I know that he wants Republicans to vote for him clearly and expects them to. So they're going to want to know what he thinks of the president. But those moderates that he's going for in the middle and some of the Democrats he wants to lure over would be very curious, would they not, to know what he thinks of the job President Obama is doing?
Oh, I think you're right. I think if he wanted to corral more Democrat support, sure. Go on your show and say, hey, President Obama is doing a terrific job. But MPS, that's what your average your average politician would do. But he's not your average politician. It's like, okay, here's the road politicians go down, and here's the road non-politicians go down. It's like Snyder's going to take the non-political road every single time. He's made it clear right from the get-go. Right when he started his campaign. I mean, if you think about it, this whole nerd business. I mean, think when you first heard about nerd, I mean, why in the world would you want to portray yourself as a nerd? I mean, it's almost sort of like a negative sort of thing. But he wants to separate himself from the pack so much he's going to extremes. And perhaps that's why he handled the interview with you the way he did yesterday.
Okay, let's go to the next part here. Then this is Rick Snyder and myself yesterday.
Are troubling in many respects. Michigan has been a challenged government for some time in how we operate, and it's unfortunate to see the federal government, in terms of their spending patterns and everything else, potentially doing an even worse job than we've been challenged in our state. So there's a lot of work to be done throughout government overall, both at the state and federal level. But my primary focus is before Michigan starts talking about everyone else's issues, let's get our act together and move forward in a positive way.
You know, MPS, he's sticking to issues. He's sticking to issues pertaining specifically to Michigan. You notice that anytime through the course of the interview you strayed a little bit about issues not directly related to the state. I mean, not directly, right, narrowly focused to the state.
Okay.
He didn't want to go there.
Let's get to the Michigan issue then. I think that's next. What do you think Governor Granholm's biggest flaw was?
I don't waste time on looking back and putting blame on people. I mean, that's one of the concerns that we have in the state is we spend too much time looking backwards. Because the issue that we have right in front of us is we're an economic disaster, and our government doesn't work efficiently. So the way I view it is instead of getting back and looking at things in the past that just cause hard feelings with people and difficulties, let's move forward and let's go solve some problems instead of continuing to fight about things.
The only problem is that one of the problems that Governor Granholm herself has admitted is that she didn't have any legislative experience when she got the job after being Attorney General.
Yeah. Well, MPS, that answer, the way you framed it, I mean, for someone who didn't want to answer it, he handled it beautifully because he just didn't want, because, okay, think about it. If he, again, you get to this grade thing, I mean, just like the way you asked about the president. I mean, you're putting him in a position where he's got to exert his opinion, and he just didn't want to have to deal with that because no matter what he said, he was set up for a follow-up question, and then perhaps a question after that. And then it's fodder for Mark Brewer, the head of the state Democratic Party, to react to it. And before you know it, he's mired in this thing that he didn't want to get into in the first place. So he avoids all of that by saying, you know, MPS, I don't want to go there. Let's focus on the state. Let's not be negative. Let's be positive.
Okay, here's the next question. Oh, let's talk about your ability to fix the problems or your desire to fix the problems. What do you say to people who, like Mark Brewer was on the program a few minutes ago and says, if Rick Snyder's elected governor, he's going to have to do on-the-job training. And there are people who say that Rick Snyder really doesn't understand the legislative process. He's not used to having to work with senators and representatives, and that there's going to be a huge learning curve because there are going to be a lot of new members of the legislature. How do you answer that question?
Well, if you look at it, a lot of the legislators themselves are good, well-intentioned people, but they're in a broken culture. I mean, their culture doesn't work. So part of it is, if it worked well, that might be a fair statement to make. When you've got something that's broken, isn't it good that you get somebody that's coming in with some common sense, real-world solutions to say, let's move forward in a positive way?
And Gary, that last question, where I asked him how does he respond to people who wonder how he's going to deal with the legislative process when he has no legislative background. And Mr. Snyder said something to the effect that, well, their culture is broken. So if you have a broken culture, he said the legislators themselves are fine people, but their culture is broken. So if you have a broken culture, why not bring in somebody new? What did you make of that answer?
Well, what he's saying, why should I learn? Why should I get involved in something that's not working? I bring something new. I want to bring the newness to the system, not the old stuff that just mired in failure. That's the point he tried to make, and I thought he made it very, very well.
But nevertheless, I mean, you can say that the culture is broken, but it's how it works. The system, he doesn't have any choice. This is how the system is going to work.
But not to Rick Snyder. In his perspective, he says it's so busted, he wants nothing to do with it. I think he's going to he'll come to grips with the ancillary stuff. Yeah. The stuff, the mechanism that keeps the machine rolling. Obviously, everybody knows he's got to know that. But beyond that, forget it. He's his own man. He's going to bring in his own system, period.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
That's the gist what I got out of what he was saying. I mean, he came right to the point and said, you know what? Why involve yourself? Why spend time with something that hasn't been working for so long? I bring something new.
Well, I think, you know what, probably we're going to have to learn the details of exactly what he thinks he's going to be able to do.
And we will.
Just because I-96 is covered with potholes, you say you're going to go a different way. We want to know the route you're going to take.
You're right, MPS. You're absolutely. He's going to have to clarify all this stuff, and he's going to be forced to between now and Election Day. You know, maybe he won't. Maybe he'll, who knows how he's going to handle it, but he's definitely not your average Politico, that's for sure.
I mean, if the route from Grand Rapids to Lansing, let's say, on I-96 is covered with potholes, and so you don't want to drive that way, you're going to go a different way. We're going to need to know which way you're going to go, because what if it's, through Traverse City? We don't have time for that kind of a big, long diversion, is the way I'm reading it. Well, thank you for the analysis.
All right,
I
MPS.
appreciate
Well, thank
that
you
very much.